the widowed Apache woman he hired as a cleaner. He never knew she would become his wife. John had never imagined that a simple decision to hire a cleaner could change his life. Ever since his wife had passed away 2 years ago, his life had become a quiet, orderly routine of work and solitude. He lived alone in a small, cozy house at the edge of town. The walls of his home were filled with memories of laughter, love, and the warmth that once filled every corner. Now, the silence seemed louder than ever. Every morning, he would wake up to an empty kitchen, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, without anyone to share it with. Dinner was usually a simple affair, eaten in front of the television, and the nights were long and lonely. John tried to keep himself busy with work. He was a skilled mechanic and spent most of his days repairing vehicles and managing his small garage. Purpose, but it could not fill the empty space his wife had left behind. Friends and colleagues had offered their condolences and support, but as time passed, the visits became less frequent, leaving John with the weight of his grief to carry alone. Even though he tried to remain strong, there were moments when he would catch himself staring at the photographs of his wife, remembering her smile, the sound of her laughter, and the way she always knew exactly how to make him feel better. Pain. Those memories were beautiful but also painfully sharp reminders of what he had lost. It was on a particularly chaotic morning that John realized he needed help. The house, which once seemed manageable, now appeared cluttered and neglected. Bills had piled up on the dining table, laundry was scattered across the living room, and the kitchen had begun to feel like a place that could never be truly clean again. Despang. John was proud of how he had managed everything on his own, but he also knew that his efforts were becoming insufficient. He needed someone who could take care of the house, someone reliable and careful. One of his friends had suggested hiring a cleaner. At first, John had hesitated. The idea of inviting a stranger into his home felt strange, almost intrusive. But eventually, practicality won over pride. He needed help, and there was no shame in admitting it. But after a few calls, he had arranged for a woman named Maya to come and clean his house. The description his friend had given him was simple. She's quiet, respectful, and really thorough. You won't regret it. John had felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He wondered what kind of person she would be, and whether the presence of someone new in his home would feel comforting or awkward. When Maya arrived, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She was a woman in her early 30s, with soft, dark eyes that seemed to hold both wisdom and sorrow. Her movements were calm and deliberate, and there was a gentle seriousness about her that made it clear she took her work seriously. John opened the door and greeted her with a simple, "Good morning." Maya returned the greeting with a polite nod and a soft smile. She carried a small bag with cleaning supplies and a quiet confidence, as though she knew exactly what needed to be done. The first moments of their interaction were formal and a little awkward. John felt self-conscious about having someone in his home, while Maya seemed careful not to overstep any boundaries. She asked a few questions about the house, his preferences, and the areas that needed the most attention. John found himself answering more than he expected, explaining the routines he used to maintain the house and the little habits his late wife had had. Maya listened patiently, nodding occasionally, her expression thoughtful. There was no rush in her manner, no judgment, only a quiet attentiveness that John found unexpectedly comforting. As Maya began her work, John observed her from a distance. She moved through the house with care, tidying, dusting, and cleaning in a way that seemed almost meditative. Every movement was purposeful, and she seemed to notice the small details that he often overlooked. The way she straightened the cushions on the sofa, carefully organized the kitchen counter, and polished the surfaces brought a sense of order back into the house. John had expected the house to be cleaner, but he hadn't expected it to feel alive again, as if her presence had breathed a subtle warmth into the rooms. There was an unspoken rhythm that developed between them. Maya worked quietly, occasionally asking questions about how John liked things done. He responded with short, polite answers at first, but gradually he found himself talking more freely. He shared small details about his daily routines, his work at the garage, and the little quirks that made his house feel like home. Maya listened without interruption, sometimes offering a kind word or a small suggestion, but mostly allowing John to speak. Narration.
Her calm, attentive presence created a sense of ease that he hadn't felt in a long time. John noticed little things about her, too.
The way she smiled briefly when she found something she thought was particularly well arranged, the gentle sigh she gave when she lifted a heavy item, or the quiet determination in her eyes when she tackled a difficult task. There was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that seemed to radiate from her every action. John couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration, though he kept it to himself. He wondered what her life had been like before she came here, what challenges she had faced, and what had led her to this moment in his house.
Maya, on the other hand, observed John carefully as well.
She noticed the way he moved through his home, the careful attention he paid to certain objects, and the subtle signs of grief that lingered in his expressions. Buff. She could see that he was a man carrying a heavy burden, someone who had experienced deep loss but was still trying to maintain control of his life. There was a quiet respect in the way she approached him, not pity, not intrusion, but a recognition of his humanity and his pain. She was determined to do her work well, to bring a sense of order and calm into his home, but she also found herself quietly hoping that he might find some comfort in her presence. As the morning progressed, the initial awkwardness began to fade, where small conversations emerged naturally, often about mundane topics, the weather, the local market, or a shared memory of a community event. These conversations were simple, but they carried an unexpected warmth. John found himself smiling occasionally, surprised at how easy it was to speak with her. Maya, too, felt a subtle sense of connection, a recognition that this man was not just a client, but someone who had known love and loss, someone whose life was quietly aching for companionship. By the time she finished the cleaning, the house looked transformed. Every surface gleamed, every corner was tidy, and the air seemed fresher, lighter. John felt a small sense of relief and gratitude. He thanked her sincerely, and for a moment there was a quiet pause, a shared understanding that this meeting had been more than a simple business arrangement. Maya smiled softly, nodded, and gathered her things. She left the house with a quiet dignity, leaving John with a sense of curiosity and an unexpected warmth that he could not quite explain. That evening, John sat alone in his living room reflecting on the day. He realized that he had spent the entire day watching Maya work, noticing her care, her attention, and her quiet strength. He felt a strange mixture of admiration and comfort. There was something about her presence that made the house feel less empty, something that made the silence feel less oppressive. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt a glimmer of hope, a small, tentative feeling that perhaps his life could feel lighter, even if just a little.
For Maya, the day had been equally significant.
She had arrived at a stranger's home, expecting nothing more than work and routine. Yet she found herself noticing the quiet sadness in John's eyes, the gentle way he moved through his home, and the care he had once taken to create a space that was full of love. But she felt a quiet empathy for him, a recognition of shared humanity that went beyond words.
Though she remained reserved, she carried with her a small sense of anticipation for the next visit, wondering what small connections might grow from these first encounters.
And so their story began, not with a dramatic event or a sudden twist, but with a quiet morning, a small act of kindness, and the subtle recognition of two people who had both known loss and were cautiously opening their hearts to the possibility of connection. In that simple, ordinary day, the foundation for something unexpected, something transformative, had quietly taken root, waiting to grow into a bond neither of them had anticipated. As the days passed, Maya returned to John's house and a quiet rhythm developed between them. Every visit was more than just work. It was an opportunity for a small, unspoken connection to grow.
John had initially thought that hiring a cleaner would simply relieve the burden of maintaining his home, but he soon realized it was more than that.
Maya's presence brought a sense of life, warmth, and careful attention that he hadn't realized he had been missing. Their conversations, once formal and polite, began to flow more easily. At first, they were about simple things: where to place a vase, how he liked the laundry folded, or the best way to arrange the books on the shelf. John noticed that Maya had a natural eye for detail, and he appreciated the thoughtful touches she added to his home. But slowly, their dialogue began to touch on personal matters. He would share small stories about his childhood, or about his late wife, and Maya would listen patiently, her expression calm and empathetic. But she didn't offer platitudes or rushed advice. She simply listened, and that in itself was comforting. Maya, too, began to share bits of herself, though carefully. Breath. She would speak of her late husband in quiet, measured tones, never dwelling too long but never hiding the pain either. She spoke of the life they had shared, the small joys and the challenges they had faced together. Bait. John listened with quiet respect, recognizing in her stories the same kind of grief he carried. There was a bond forming, fragile and tentative, but real. Both of them understood loss, not as a passing sadness, but as a part of life that shaped who they were. And in this shared understanding, they began to find a quiet companionship. One afternoon, as Maya cleaned the living room, she noticed that John had been unusually quiet. His eyes, usually alert and focused, seemed distant. She hesitated for a moment, then asked gently, "Is everything all right today?" John looked up, a faint smile crossing his face. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice carried a subtle heaviness. Maya didn't push. Instead, she continued her work, tidying the room with careful movements. But the simple act of noticing, of asking, created a small bridge between them, a recognition that they could see each other's humanity without judgment. John found himself looking forward to these moments more than he expected. He would catch himself wondering how her day had been, or what small gestures she might bring with her next visit. Sometimes, Maya would leave a note with a simple message. "I've organized the kitchen the way you like it," or "I thought these books might be better on this shelf," and he would feel a small warmth in his chest. It was a subtle, gentle kind of care, the kind that didn't demand attention but quietly nurtured a sense of trust and comfort. Maya noticed changes in John as well. He was beginning to smile more, though softly and cautiously. He would sometimes share a small story about a funny incident at work, or recall a happy memory from his past. She could see that her presence was making a difference, even if he didn't fully realize it. She also noticed the careful way he maintained his home, the small rituals he observed, and the quiet pride he took in doing things himself. There was dignity in the way he lived, a steadfastness that spoke of resilience and strength.
One day, as she was cleaning the kitchen, Maya asked John a simple question about his family.
Fast. He hesitated for a moment, then shared stories of his parents and siblings, of family gatherings long ago, and of the small traditions that had shaped his life. Maya listened intently, asking questions when appropriate, her curiosity gentle and genuine. She didn't interrupt or offer unsolicited advice. She simply allowed him to speak, creating a safe space where he could share pieces of himself that he hadn't voiced in years. These moments began to form the foundation of something deeper. John realized that he was no longer just watching her work. He was observing her as a person. He noticed the grace in her movements, the calm determination in her eyes, and the quiet strength she carried despite the hardships she had endured. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't there, wondering about the small details of her life, the stories behind her expressions, and the way she seemed to understand him without needing explanations. Maya, in turn, was discovering a side of John that few had seen, but she noticed the care he took in everything he did, the thoughtfulness behind his actions, and the subtle ways he tried to honor the memory of his late wife. She also saw the loneliness that lingered beneath his calm exterior, a quiet longing for companionship and understanding. In her presence he seemed to soften, revealing small glimpses of the man he had once been and the man he was still becoming. Their bond grew gradually, almost imperceptibly, but it was real. It was built on shared moments of silence, gentle laughter, and the small rituals of daily life. Sometimes they would share a cup of coffee in the kitchen while Maya finished her work, talking about trivial matters that somehow felt significant. Other times, they would find themselves laughing quietly over a minor mishap, a misplaced item or a minor spill. And in those moments, the weight of their past seemed to lift just a little. One particularly quiet evening, John received a phone call about a problem at the garage. He was stressed and frustrated, unsure how to handle the situation.
Maya, noticing his tension, quietly offered a suggestion and helped him organize his thoughts.
Her advice was practical, calm, and thoughtful, and John felt a wave of relief wash over him. He realized in that moment that her presence was not just helpful in a practical sense. It was comforting emotionally as well. She brought a sense of calm and clarity to his life that he hadn't realized he had been missing. Maya, too, felt the subtle shift in their relationship. She had come into his home to work, to earn a living, but she found herself increasingly invested in his well-being. She cared about his comfort, his happiness, and even his little frustrations. She noticed the way he relaxed slightly in her presence, how his posture softened, and how his expressions seemed lighter. There was a mutual respect developing, a recognition that they both carried scars but were still capable of connection, trust, and perhaps even joy. Over time, their conversations became more personal. John shared memories of his wife, describing her kindness, humor, and the little quirks that had made her so special. Maya listened quietly, offering a soft word of understanding, never attempting to replace the past but acknowledging it with respect. In return, she shared stories of her life as a widowed Apache woman, the challenges she had faced, the love she had lost, and the small victories that had kept her moving forward. These exchanges were delicate, careful, but profoundly meaningful. They were learning to navigate the fine line between past grief and present connection. There were small gestures that spoke volumes. Maya would remember John's preferences, leaving his favorite tea ready in the kitchen or placing the newspaper where he liked it. John, in turn, would offer a quiet word of thanks, sometimes lingering a moment longer than necessary, simply to enjoy the shared presence. It was in these small acts that their bond strengthened. A bond built not on dramatic declarations, but on the gentle accumulation of care, attention, and respect. Friends and neighbors began to notice subtle changes as well. John seemed lighter, more at ease, and occasionally smiled in a way that felt genuine rather than habitual. Maya carried herself with a quiet confidence, and there was a warmth in her demeanor that drew others in. Though they did not overtly acknowledge it, the unspoken connection between them was becoming visible to those who knew them. As the weeks turned into months, the professional relationship between John and Maya began to evolve. The house, once merely a place of order and maintenance, became a space of shared moments, small joys, and quiet companionship. They discovered that even in mundane tasks, cleaning, organizing, preparing meals, there was room for connection, understanding, and subtle affection. They were learning to trust each other, to rely on each other, and to find comfort in a presence that had arrived quietly but made an indelible mark. By the end of the second month, John realized something remarkable. He no longer thought of Maya merely as a cleaner. She had become a part of his life in a way he hadn't anticipated. He found himself anticipating her visits, cherishing the moments of shared conversation, and valuing her presence beyond the practical help she provided. Maya, too, felt a quiet anticipation, a sense of fulfillment in knowing that her work, and her presence was meaningful to someone else. In the quiet of one late afternoon, as Maya finished tidying the living room, John paused and said, almost reluctantly, "You've done more than just clean the house. You've made it feel alive again." Maya smiled softly, a gentle warmth in her eyes, and simply nodded. There was no need for further explanation. They both understood that something subtle, profound, and beautiful was beginning to take root. A bond formed not from sudden romance but from mutual respect, understanding, and shared humanity. And so, their connection continued to grow. Day by day, conversation by conversation, small act by small act, John and Maya were discovering the power of presence, care, and the quiet magic of an unexpected companionship. What began as a simple arrangement of work and routine was slowly blossoming into something neither of them had anticipated. Something tender, meaningful, and filled with the quiet promise of what might come next. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between John and Maya grew stronger, though neither of them fully admitted it yet. What began as a professional relationship had slowly become a quiet companionship built on trust, shared moments, and understanding. John had come to appreciate Maya not just for her careful work around the house, but for her calm presence that seemed to make the home feel lighter. Maya, in turn, noticed the subtle ways John was beginning to open his heart, revealing pieces of himself that had been buried under grief for too long.
One afternoon, as Maya was cleaning the living room, John returned home earlier than usual.
He looked tired, his shoulders slightly slumped, and a frown of worry creased his forehead. Maya noticed immediately. She paused her work and asked gently, "Is everything okay?" John hesitated, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's the garage," he admitted. "Bae, one of the machines broke down and I'm not sure how to fix it before the weekend. I've got orders waiting and I can't let the customers down." Maya set down the cleaning supplies and walked over, her presence calm and steady.
"Maybe I can help," she said softly.
"Best." John looked at her, surprised.
"I don't think cleaning will help fix the machines," he said with a faint smile, though his frustration was clear.
Maya shook her head.
"Not cleaning," she replied. "Make passive it."
"I just mean, maybe talking it through, making a plan. Sometimes it helps to have another set of eyes." At first, John was skeptical, but he found himself sharing the details of the problem. He explained which part of the machine was malfunctioning, what attempts he had already made to fix it, and the pressure he felt from upcoming orders. Maya listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. Then, with quiet confidence, she suggested small steps to approach the problem. "Try checking the connections first, then see if the motor is aligned properly.
Take it one step at a time. You'll feel less overwhelmed if you focus on one thing at a time," she advised.
Bae. John followed her guidance, and to his surprise, her suggestions worked. The machine started functioning again after a few adjustments. Relief washed over him, and he couldn't help but look at Maya with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "Beck, don't know what to say," he admitted, a small smile forming on his lips. "Thank you. I was really stressed, and somehow you helped me see the solution." Maya smiled softly in return. "I'm glad," she said simply. There was no need for anything more. The moment itself carried the weight of understanding, care, and connection. From that day forward, John began to see Maya not just as someone who kept his home in order, but as a source of calm and clarity in his life. He began to look forward to her visits in a different way, anticipating not just the tidiness she brought, but the quiet reassurance of her presence. Maya, too, began to feel a subtle shift in her own heart. She cared about his happiness, his well-being, and even the small worries he carried with him. She had come into his life simply to work, yet she found herself invested in him in a way that surprised her. Their conversations began to grow deeper and more personal. John would sometimes share stories of his late wife, speaking of her kindness, humor, and the small traditions they had cherished together. Maya listened attentively, never interrupting or judging, simply acknowledging his grief with empathy. In return, she shared more about her own past, her late husband, the life they had built together, and the challenges she had faced as a widowed Apache woman. These stories were delicate and carefully told, but they created a bridge between them, connecting two lives marked by loss but also by resilience. One rainy afternoon, as Maya folded laundry in the living room, John sat nearby, sipping a cup of tea. The sound of raindrops tapping against the window created a quiet, reflective atmosphere. John spoke softly, almost to himself, about how lonely he had felt after his wife passed away. "I thought I could handle it," he admitted. "I told myself I was strong enough, that I didn't need anyone else. But it was harder than I ever imagined." Some days, it felt like the silence would never end. Maya listened, her hands moving slowly but steadily as she continued folding. "Grief is different for everyone," she said gently. "It doesn't go away, but over time it becomes easier to carry. You just have to let yourself feel it, and let others be there too." John looked at her, surprised by the quiet wisdom in her words. There was no judgment, no advice that felt forced, just understanding. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of relief, as if someone truly saw him. That evening, John began to notice subtle ways in which his feelings for Maya were changing. He found himself caring about her comfort, wanting to make sure she had everything she needed, even offering a cup of tea or a snack during her visits. Bask. He noticed the softness in her smile, the quiet strength in her demeanor, and the patience with which she approached life. It was a gentle admiration at first, a recognition of her character, but it was slowly growing into something deeper. Maya, too, began to sense a shift in her own heart. She found herself thinking about John when she wasn't at his home, wondering how his day had gone, and hoping he was managing his work and daily routines without stress. Recognized that she felt a quiet warmth when he thanked her or shared a small story, and that these moments were becoming more important than they should have been for a professional arrangement. But she reminded herself to be careful, to maintain boundaries, but she could not deny the growing affection she felt for him. One weekend, John received news that a family member was ill. He felt torn between leaving town to help and managing his responsibilities at the garage. Maya noticed his worry and offered practical advice, helping him plan a short trip while ensuring that his work would not fall behind. Breath. Her thoughtfulness and consideration went beyond the duties of a cleaner. It showed a level of care and attention that touched John deeply.
He realized that Maya was becoming someone he could rely on not just for household tasks, but for emotional support and guidance.
As they spent more time together, their bond deepened through small, meaningful gestures. Maya began to anticipate John's preferences, arranging his books, making his favorite tea, and even remembering little details about his schedule. John, in turn, became more attentive to her needs, offering a quiet smile when she accomplished something difficult, or pausing to engage in conversation rather than rushing her through the work. These moments, though subtle, carried the weight of mutual respect, understanding, and a growing emotional connection. Friends and neighbors started noticing the changes too. But John, once quiet and reserved, seemed lighter, more relaxed, and occasionally smiled in a way that was genuine rather than habitual. Maya carried herself with a quiet confidence, and there was a warmth in her demeanor that drew others in.
While neither of them openly acknowledged the growing affection between them, it was becoming apparent to those who knew them that something special was developing. One evening, as the sun set and the house was bathed in golden light, John found himself looking at Maya differently.
She was arranging the living room, her movements precise and calm, yet there was a softness in her expression that made his chest feel warmer than usual. For the first time, he realized that he cared deeply about her, not just as a person who helped maintain his home, but as someone whose presence had become essential to his emotional well-being. Maya, sensing his gaze, looked up and smiled briefly, her eyes meeting his in a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement of their growing connection. The next few weeks were filled with shared moments of understanding and subtle affection. They laughed together over small mishaps, like a spilled cup of tea or a misplaced item. They shared quiet conversations about dreams, memories, and the lessons life had taught them. John began to recognize that Maya's presence was no longer just comforting. It was transformative. She had helped him navigate grief, find calm amidst stress, and open his heart to the possibility of connection again. Maya, too, felt the quiet joy of being appreciated, trusted, and understood. It was during these months that both of them realized the depth of their feelings. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, but a gentle awareness that their lives had intertwined in ways neither had expected. The home, once a space of solitude and silence, had become a place of shared moments, emotional support, and quiet companionship. They were learning to rely on each other, not out of necessity, but because they genuinely cared. One rainy afternoon, as they shared a cup of tea while watching the raindrops race down the window pane, John finally spoke what he had been feeling for weeks.
I don't know when it happened, he said softly, but I realized that having you here, it makes everything feel lighter. The house, my days, even life itself.
I didn't expect to feel this way, but I do! Maya looked at him, her eyes reflecting both surprise and warmth. She hesitated, then replied quietly, I feel the same. I didn't expect to, but I do. In that quiet, rain-soaked moment, their hearts spoke the words their minds had been hesitant to acknowledge. They were no longer just employer and cleaner. They were two people who had found understanding, comfort, and a growing affection in each other's presence. Best. It was not a sudden romance, but a gentle, patient realization that their lives had become intertwined in a way that neither could ignore. And so, the foundation for something deeper had been laid. The connection between John and Maya had grown from simple interactions to a bond of trust, care, and quiet love. Both of them knew that challenges and uncertainties still lay ahead, but they also knew that they would face them together, with the strength and understanding they had nurtured over months of shared moments, laughter, and quiet support. The months that followed were filled with quiet happiness and gentle companionship. John and Maya had settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable, meaningful, and surprisingly joyful. What had begun as a simple arrangement, Maya cleaning John's house, had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Their bond was no longer only about shared work or conversations. It had grown into a connection that touched every corner of their lives. One morning, John woke up and noticed something unusual. His heart felt lighter, and the air in the house seemed warmer than usual. He realized that he looked forward to Maya's visits not merely because of the help she provided, but because of her presence itself. Her quiet laughter, her careful attention, and the calm confidence she carried had become a part of the rhythm of his days. He smiled to himself, acknowledging the truth he had been avoiding. He had fallen in love with her. Maya, too, felt a shift within herself. She had always been cautious about her emotions, careful not to become too attached too quickly. But in John's presence, she felt a sense of ease she hadn't known in years. His kindness, patience, and genuine care had quietly nurtured a part of her heart that had been closed since her husband's passing. She realized that she, too, had fallen in love, though she had waited for the right moment to admit it to herself. One afternoon, a small challenge arose that would bring their feelings into sharper focus. John had been asked to take on an urgent repair job at the garage that required him to leave early in the morning and return late at night. He was torn between his responsibilities and his desire to maintain the calm, steady rhythm of his home. Maya noticed his unease as she tidied the living room. "You look worried," she said softly. "Is something bothering you?" John sighed and ran a hand over his face. "It's just this job is important, but it will be exhausting. I don't know how I'll manage everything." Maya paused and then suggested a solution. "Why don't we make a plan together? We can organize your tasks so that it's easier to handle, and I'll help make sure the house is ready for your return." "You don't have to carry it all alone." Her words struck a chord with John. It wasn't just her practicality that impressed him. It was her thoughtfulness, her willingness to stand beside him without taking over, without judgment. He realized how deeply he relied on her presence, not just for help, but for emotional support. The fact that she cared enough to step in and offer guidance made his heart swell with gratitude and affection. That evening, after John returned from the garage, he noticed the house was arranged just as he liked it. Maya had anticipated his fatigue and had prepared a simple meal, leaving it on the kitchen table with a warm smile. The gesture, small as it seemed, touched him deeply. He sat across from her, his heart racing, realizing that he no longer wanted to hide his feelings. "Maya," he began, his voice gentle but earnest, "I don't know how to say this, but having you in my life has made all the difference. You've brought comfort, laughter, and warmth where I thought there would only be emptiness. I care for you more than I ever expected." Maya's eyes softened, and a quiet smile appeared on her face. She reached across the table and placed her hand lightly over his. "John, I feel the same," she replied. "I didn't want to admit it at first, but you've become someone I care about deeply."
"You've helped me heal in ways I didn't think were possible." For a moment the room was filled with a peaceful silence, a mutual understanding that words alone could not fully express.
They were no longer just companions. They were two hearts recognizing the love that had quietly grown between them. In the following weeks, their relationship began to blossom in small, meaningful ways. They spent time together outside the house, taking walks in the park, sharing meals at local cafes, and exploring small adventures in their town. Each outing revealed new sides of their personalities, and the bond between them strengthened with every shared laugh, every quiet conversation, and every moment of understanding. Friends and family soon noticed the change as well. John's colleagues commented on how his demeanor had softened, how he seemed lighter, more present, and happier than they had seen in years. Maya's friends remarked on the subtle glow she carried, the quiet joy that radiated from her whenever she spoke of John. Yet both of them remained humble, never flaunting their feelings but allowing their actions, gestures, and the comfort they found in each other to speak for themselves. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, John decided it was time to take a step forward. He had spent weeks planning, thinking carefully about how to express his intentions without overwhelming Maya. He wanted the moment to feel natural, heartfelt, and intimate. When Maya arrived that evening, he greeted her with a nervous smile and led her to the living room, where he had prepared a simple setup, a small bouquet of wildflowers, a cup of tea, and a quiet space by the window. "Maya," he began, his voice steady but tender. "I know we've both had our share of loss, our own journeys of grief and healing, but through it all, you've become someone I cannot imagine my life without. Best. You've brought hope, laughter, and love back into my days. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. She took his hands in hers, feeling the sincerity and depth of his words. "John," she whispered, "I've hoped for this without daring to believe it could happen. I want to spend my life with you too. you've shown me that love can grow again, quietly, gently, and fully. I cannot imagine my days without you. Embrace. Their embrace was filled with quiet joy, a culmination of months of shared experiences, trust, and growing love. It was a love that had been nurtured slowly, patiently, and sincerely, a love that neither of them had expected but now embraced completely. In the weeks that followed, they began planning a small, intimate wedding. They wanted it to be a celebration of not just their love, but the journey that had brought them together. They incorporated elements of Maya's Apache heritage, honoring her roots with traditional music and symbolic gestures, while also including John's family and friends in a way that felt warm and personal. It was a blending of two lives, two histories, and two hearts, creating a new chapter built on respect, understanding, and shared hope.
On the day of the wedding, the house was filled with laughter, warmth, and quiet excitement.
John and Maya exchanged vows in a simple ceremony, speaking from the heart and promising to support, cherish, and honor each other. They acknowledged their pasts, the losses they had endured, and the strength they had found in one another. Every word, every smile, and every glance carried the weight of their journey. A journey from loneliness to companionship, from grief to love. After the ceremony, as they walked hand in hand through the garden where the wedding had taken place, John looked at Maya and said softly, "I never imagined that hiring a cleaner would lead to this moment." Maya laughed gently, resting her head on his shoulder. "Braves, life is full of surprises," she replied. "Sometimes the most unexpected moments bring the greatest happiness." Their life together was not perfect. No life ever is, but it was filled with understanding, care, and mutual respect. They faced challenges together, celebrated small victories, and built a home where laughter, love, and warmth were constant companions. John's once lonely house had become a home full of joy, shared stories, and quiet affection. Maya's heart, which had carried the weight of past grief, had found healing and love once more. In the months and years that followed, John and Maya continued to nurture their relationship, always remembering the quiet beginnings that had brought them together. They often reflected on how a simple act, hiring a cleaner, had led to the discovery of love, trust, and a lifelong partnership. Their story became one of hope, patience, and the gentle reminder that life often surprises us when we least expect it, bringing happiness in the most unexpected ways. And so, the widowed Apache woman and the man who had hired her found a love that neither had imagined at first, a love that had grown quietly, patiently, and beautifully. Together they built a life filled with laughter, understanding, and shared dreams. The house that had once been quiet and empty now echoed with warmth, care, and the unmistakable joy of two hearts beating together. Their journey was a testament to the power of patience, empathy, and the unexpected ways love can enter our lives. It reminded them, and everyone who heard their story, that the smallest, simplest decisions can sometimes lead to the most profound transformations. And for John and Maya, that transformation had brought them together in a love that would last a lifetime.